The scream tore through the house like a knife through cloth. Grace's voice. Sure. Then the sound no one ever forgets, the splash of boiling water hitting skin. The pot clanged on the tiles. A hiss rose like a snake. Steam leaped up and swallowed the kitchen window. No. Please. Grace cried, hands up, back pressed to the cupboard. Linda, her stepmother, stood over her, breathing hard, her face tight like a closed fist, the kettle still shaking in her hand. Grace stumbled, fell to her knees, and the red patch on her arm and shoulder shone wet and angry. The smell of scalded skin and spilled rice filled the air. Cups rolled across the floor. A silver spoon spun and rattled till it went still. You think you can make me look foolish? Linda shouted. You think you can take my place in this house? Her words were stones. She tossed the empty kettle into the sink and reached for the pot on the stove. Grace lifted her good arm like a small shield. Please, Linda, she whispered. But the second pot moved, and in that one wild heartbeat, the front door swung open. Henry, Grace's father, stepped into the kitchen and froze. He saw the steam. He saw the red on his daughter's skin. He saw Linda's hand on the handle of the pot, and something inside him went very still, like a lake holding its breath before a storm. Linda, he said, voice low. The pot handle slipped from her fingers and hit the stove with a dull sound. Silence flooded in. The only noise was the kettle's tiny clicking as it cooled in Grace's small, shaking breaths. Henry's jaw tightened. He dropped his briefcase. The papers inside exploded across the floor like white birds. He took off his jacket in one quick move and wrapped it around Grace's shoulders, careful not to touch the burn. Sweetheart, he said. I'm here. He looked up at Linda. His eyes held no shaking. What did you do? Linda's mouth opened, then closed. She spilled it herself, she said too fast. Clumsy girl. Always clumsy. Henry's eyes cut to the stove, 2 pots both boiling. To the floor, splashes up the cupboard but none near the stove where Grace stood. To Linda's hand, no splash marks on her dress, none on her shoes. The truth sat on the tiles like a bright coin. He didn't argue. He lifted Grace in his arms, and as he did, she gasped from the pain and pushed her face into his chest. He turned toward the door. Linda took one step to block him. Where are you going? She asked. Henry? She's fine. Henry didn't raise his voice. He didn't push her aside. He said 8 words that made Linda's face lose all its color. Move or I ring the town bell, now. In our town the bell meant one thing. Everyone comes. Elders, neighbors, the pastor, the teacher, the old woman who sells tomatoes. The bell did not stop ringing until the truth came out. It was old, older than the paved road and the new glass shops, a rule tied to our people like thread to cloth. The bell saw no job, no name, no money. It only saw right and wrong. Linda stepped back. Henry carried Grace out into the evening light. The wind smelled of dust and hibiscus. Shadows from the mango tree lay like long fingers across the yard. He paused only once to look at the iron bell that hung by the gate, a small thing with a deep voice, and then he looked at Linda again. His hand hovered near the rope. Henry, Linda tried, her voice suddenly soft, suddenly sweet. Wait, please, let me explain. Henry's fingers closed around the rope. And then he pulled. The moment shattered. The bell's voice jumped into the air. 1, 2, 3 strikes, each louder than the last, rolling over rooftops and running down the dusty road like a drum calling feet. Dogs barked. Doors opened. Heads turned. Linda's eyes went wide. She took a step back into the shade of the veranda, as if the shadow could hide her. Henry did not look at her again. He reached the gate, shifted Grace in his arms, and began to walk toward the square, where the elders wait, where truth stands on a stool and speaks. The whole town would come. And Linda, who thought she held the house like a puppet in her hand, suddenly realized the house had windows and the world had eyes. That was the peak. Now let me tell you how we got here and why that bell mattered and why what Henry did next would leave Linda in complete shock. It began with a dance, a promise, and a mistake made in loneliness. Henry had been a widower for 3 years. He was not old, but sorrow can make even a young man walk slowly. He had a daughter, Grace, who wore her hair in loose curls and read books the way some people breathe. She was gentle like the first rain in a dry month. She helped at the church, tied ribbons on the benches when weddings came, and always kept rice ready for anyone who knocked at their gate hungry. People in the town said, "That girl has a soft heart," and they meant it as praise, but soft hearts can be easy to bruise. Linda came to town on a bus with blue curtains. She wore a green dress and a smile that knew how to find light. She sold fabrics at the market, colorful ones that made even the shy women try them on. She had a laugh like clinking beads, and when she laughed, men looked up from their papers. She saw Henry buying thread for Grace's school project and saw the grief that still sat in his shoulders like a heavy coat. She touched his wrist lightly and said, "You should buy 2 spools. One for mistakes." He smiled for the first time in a long time. That is how it started. When Linda walked into Henry's house as a bride, the rooms woke up. She hung curtains that let in the sun. She painted the kitchen a warm yellow. She filled the pantry with jars labeled in neat handwriting: flour, sugar, cinnamon. She told jokes at dinner. She said she loved children, and she kissed the top of Grace's head every night. For a while, everything was quiet. Henry believed love had come back home. Grace tried. She really did. She called Linda Mom, because she wanted peace. But peace is not a word, it is something people must choose. Bit by bit, Linda began to change. She started to count. Who ate the last mango? She would call. Why is the soap low? Who used more? When the window broke in a windstorm, she said, Grace, you must have slammed it. When Henry left money on the table to pay the electric bill and it went missing, Linda said, You know how careless girls can be with money. Henry frowned but said nothing. He wanted harmony so much that he sometimes covered cracks with paint and called the wall whole. Grace kept smiling. She woke early, scrubbed the steps, ironed Henry's shirts, and kept tea ready. She didn't answer when Linda poked her with small sharp words. She would say, Would you like some tea? And Linda would say, Don't try to look better than me. Grace would bite her lip and go water the flowers. Then the day of the scholarship came. One bright Saturday when the church handed out awards to students who had worked hard. Grace had studied at night by the small lamp her mother used to use. She wrote essays, asked questions, pushed herself. The letter arrived with a stamp and a seal. She had won a place in a program in the city, books, mentors, a chance to fly. The whole town clapped for her under the big mango tree. That girl, the pastor said, will go far. Henry lifted Grace in a big hug and spun her once like a child. Linda smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Envy is a quiet snake, it warms itself under smiles. Later that night, when the house was asleep, Linda stood by the kitchen window and watched the lamp glow in Grace's room. The envy shifted and found words. The next morning, a rumor crept through the market like smoke. I heard Grace cheated on the exam. No one could say who started it. Rumors are born without mothers. Grace came home from church and found 2 of her friends standing at the gate, not coming in. My mom says I shouldn't visit for a while, one whispered, eyes on her shoes. Grace's eyebrows pulled together. She looked down the road and saw other eyes turn away. Her chest felt heavy. She told herself it would pass. Truth is strong. But the week grew longer than it should have been. That Wednesday, Henry received a call from the city office. Sir, a woman said, we just need to confirm your daughter's attendance at the award ceremony next week. Please make sure she brings the form signed by her guardian. He said yes. He put down the phone with a laugh. We must celebrate, he told Linda. I'll make jollof rice. Let me cook, Linda said, quick and bright. You rest. You've done enough. She put on music and moved through the kitchen with a smile. Grace offered to help. No, Linda said. Go wash the veranda. You know how dust collects. Grace went with a bucket and a brush. She hummed a hymn. She pressed the brush in circles, watched the water turn brown, and felt a small hope begin to grow again in her chest. The smell of tomatoes and pepper filled the house. The radio played old songs. It felt almost like peace. Then Linda called from the kitchen. Grace, she said. Come taste the rice. Tell me if the salt is enough. Grace put down the brush and wiped her hands. She stepped into the kitchen with a smile. The pot sang softly on the stove. The kettle began to tremble as it reached its boil. Linda stood between Grace and the counter, eyes too bright. Closer, she said. Taste. She lifted the lid. Steam curled up and kissed Grace's face. Grace leaned in, careful. And that is when Linda reached not for the spoon but for the kettle. Everything after that moved like lightning. The hiss. The splash. The scream. The jacket wrapped around wounds. The bell rope grasped in Henry's hand. Word travels on feet faster than wind. By the time Henry reached the square, the old men had already left their shade. The women had put down their baskets. The children had been pulled by the ear to stand aside. People looked from Henry to Grace to Linda, trailing behind with her lips pressed thin. The bell still hummed. A stray dog lay under the bench and thumped its tail as if clapping. The elders sat on the long bench carved with birds, and the oldest one, Mr. Paul, lifted his hand for quiet. Who rings? Mr. Paul asked, though he could see. And why? His voice carried like calm water. Henry didn't put Grace down. He stepped forward and his face was like a door that had chosen to close. I ring, he said. For my daughter. He turned so the crowd could see the angry red on Grace's skin. There was a small sound from the women, the sound people make when something heavy falls on their hearts. Linda looked away. Henry's voice did not shake. Today, he said, in my house a line was crossed. He paused as if tasting the next words. Then he spoke again. And I will cross another line to answer it. The elders looked at one another. Speak, said Mr. Paul. But speak truth. The bell listens. Henry nodded. He gently put Grace on the cloth someone had spread on the bench. He took off his wedding ring and held it up so it caught the light. Linda blinked. The crowd murmured. Grace stared up at her father, confused, pain and fear mixing in her eyes. Henry, Linda said, voice thin. What are you doing? Henry closed his hand around the ring. He turned to the crowd. There is a rule older than all of us, he said. It says no hand in this town will burn a child and go to bed early. It says a house is a shelter, not a trap. It says a father stands like a wall when the wind rises. He looked at Linda not with anger but with something colder and clearer. I have been quiet for peace, he said. Today I will be loud for justice. Linda took a step toward him. Henry, please, she said, reaching out. It was an accident. She slipped. Mr. Paul lifted a hand and the square went still again. He turned to Henry. What will you do? He asked. His voice was soft but the question was a drum. Henry did not answer yet. Instead he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. No one knew he had it. Not even Linda. He held it in one hand and the ring in the other. He looked at the bell rope, still swinging a little. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the road, where more neighbors were hurrying with worried faces. Then he stepped forward and laid the ring on the stool in front of the elders. The paper stayed in his hand, still folded, like a secret sitting quietly, waiting to change the air. Henry, don't, Linda whispered, a tremble creeping into her voice for the first time. Henry lifted the paper higher so all could see it. He opened his mouth. And that is when the ambulance siren wailed at the far end of the road, slicing through the square like a sharp blade. The crowd turned. Dust jumped under fast wheels. The red cross flashed. 2 medics in green rushed from the back with a stretcher. One knelt by Grace, already asking questions, already reaching for cold packs, already moving with the quick care of people who train their hands to catch pain. We have to go, one said to Henry. Burns can turn bad. We need to treat her now. Henry nodded once, hard. He looked back at the elders. He looked at Linda. He looked at the paper in his hand. And then Henry did something no one expected, something that made Linda's mouth fall open and her hands start to shake. He tucked the paper into Mr. Paul's palm without a word, turned to Linda, and said in a voice the whole square could hear, Follow us. All the way. Do not run. Do not hide. Do not call anyone. Today you will watch what love does when it is angry. Linda took a step back as if the words were hot. The medics lifted Grace. Henry climbed into the ambulance and sat by his daughter, holding her unburned hand. The doors swung shut. The siren rose again. The crowd pressed aside. The ambulance shot forward, a white arrow drawn by worry and hope. Linda stood alone in the square, everyone's eyes heavy on her. Mr. Paul looked down at the paper in his hand, and his eyebrows climbed as he read the first line. He lifted his head slowly and stared at Linda like a man seeing lightning in a clear sky. The ambulance turned the corner toward the main road, and the siren faded. Dust settled. 2 elders started toward Linda. She swallowed hard and took one small step back. The bell rope swayed and stilled. And in that strange quiet, with the paper now in the elders' hands and the whole town watching, Henry's choice set a new wind moving through every doorway in our town. Where are you watching from right now? Tell me in the comments. And if this story has your heart beating, remember to like, subscribe and share it with a friend who loves good stories. We're just getting started, and you don't want to miss what happens next. The siren screamed down the dusty road, and Grace's small body shook with every bump. Her hand gripped Henry's so tightly that his fingers went numb, but he didn't dare move. He wanted her to feel his strength. He wanted her to know she was not alone. The medic beside them pressed a cold pack against the raw red skin on Grace's shoulder. Stay awake, sweetheart, the medic said gently. Just keep looking at your dad. Henry's jaw was locked. His mind spun but his body stayed calm. He stroked Grace's hair, whispering, Daddy is here. Daddy is here. His other hand curled into a fist on his lap, every knuckle white. Outside, the town flew past, the market stalls, the churchyard, the mango grove. People stared, whispering, pointing as the ambulance roared by. Everyone knew the bell had been rung. Everyone knew something terrible had happened. Back at the square, Linda stood rooted to the ground. The elders had unfolded Henry's paper. They read it, their faces shifting from confusion to shock to a grave seriousness. Mr. Paul shook his head slowly, then lifted the paper high for the crowd. But he did not read it aloud. Not yet. This, he said, his voice deep, is not for gossip. It is for judgment. Let us wait until Henry returns. The people murmured. Some shook their heads at Linda. Others drew their children closer. Linda forced a smile, thin and shaky. It was an accident, she kept saying, mostly to herself. She slipped. She slipped. But no one answered her. They simply stared. Meanwhile, the ambulance screeched into the hospital compound. The nurses rushed forward with a stretcher. Grace whimpered as they moved her. Henry followed closely, his eyes burning with unshed tears. In the treatment room, doctors worked quickly, cleaning the burns, applying soothing ointments, wrapping her wounds in white bandages. Grace cried out, the sound ripping through Henry like claws. He held her hand tighter. When it was over, the doctor turned to Henry. She is stable for now, he said. But burns are tricky. We must watch her for infection. She will need rest, care, and medicine. She is strong, but, he paused, looking at Henry carefully. What happened? Henry closed his eyes for a moment. Then he said quietly, her stepmother poured boiling water on her. The doctor's eyebrows shot up. Nurses exchanged shocked glances. The words hung heavy in the room. Sir, the doctor said slowly, that is not just a family matter. That is a crime. Henry nodded once. Yes. And tonight, the whole town will know it. Back at the house, Linda paced. She had slipped away from the square when the elders turned to discuss quietly among themselves. She shut the windows and bolted the doors as if it could keep out the truth. She muttered to herself, trying to shape excuses, trying to mold lies into something that might sound like truth. But each time she pictured Henry's face as he rang the bell, her knees weakened. She knew him. He was gentle, yes, but he was also a man who did not break his word once it was spoken. Hours later, when the night had settled, the town gathered again in the square. Torches flickered. The bell rope swung silently. The elders sat waiting. And then the sound of an engine broke the hush. The hospital jeep pulled in and Henry stepped out, carrying Grace in his arms. Her arm and shoulder were wrapped in white bandages, her face pale but her eyes awake. The crowd gasped. Women covered their mouths. Men shook their heads in anger. Henry walked to the stool in the middle of the square. He set Grace down gently on a blanket, then turned to the elders. In one hand, he held the folded paper they had already seen. In the other he carried his ring. He faced Linda, who now stood trembling near the back of the crowd. Tonight, Henry said, his voice steady and strong, we will not only speak of burns. We will speak of betrayal. He handed the paper to Mr. Paul again. The elder opened it, cleared his throat, and began to read aloud. And as the words filled the night, Linda's knees buckled. Her secret, one she thought Henry would never find, was about to break open in front of the whole town. The crowd leaned closer. Grace blinked at her father, confusion mixing with hope. Henry stood tall, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes never leaving Linda. The elder's voice rang out, this paper is proof of something hidden. Proof that concerns not just this family but all of us. He paused, his eyes heavy. And what it says will change everything you thought you knew. The crowd erupted in whispers. Linda's face turned ghostly pale. Grace clutched her father's arm. Henry simply nodded once as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. But what exactly was written on that paper? That, my friends, is what you must wait to discover. Where are you watching from right now? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to know the shocking secret on that paper, make sure you subscribe, like this story, and share it with someone who loves a good folktale. The truth is only beginning to unfold. The square was silent except for the crackle of the torches. All eyes were on Mr. Paul, the elder whose voice carried weight like the town's own heartbeat. He held the paper up so no one could claim he had switched it, then looked at Henry. Shall I read all of it? Henry nodded once. Mr. Paul cleared his throat and began. This is a certified record from the city bank. It states that Henry deposited a large inheritance in his daughter Grace's name, an account that cannot be touched by anyone except Grace and her father until she turns 18. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Linda's lips parted, her face twisting. Mr. Paul went on. The amount is not small. It is $50,000. His eyes lifted from the paper. Enough to pay for schooling, land, and a future. The people murmured louder. Women clutched their wraps tighter. Men shook their heads in disbelief. Children tugged on their mothers' hands, whispering questions. Henry stepped forward, his voice ringing clear. I hid this paper for a reason. I wanted Grace to have security, something no one could steal no matter what storms came. But someone found out. Someone in my house. His eyes locked on Linda. Linda's face flushed red. I never saw that paper, she cried, her voice shrill. I don't know what you're talking about. Henry's expression didn't change. Don't lie. I saw you searching my drawers last month. I stayed quiet, hoping you would stop. But then rumors started in the market. Lies about Grace cheating. And then tonight, you poured boiling water on her. His words hit like stones. It wasn't just jealousy of her scholarship. You wanted to break her spirit so she would not live to see this inheritance. The crowd gasped again. Linda's knees wobbled. No, it's not true. I was only angry. She's always trying to take your love from me. Mr. Paul's palm slammed on the bench. Enough. His voice rolled through the square like thunder. You do not harm a child for love. You do not burn a daughter because of jealousy. You do not curse the home that feeds you. The women in the crowd shook their heads. A man muttered, wickedness. Another spat on the ground. Linda's breath came fast and shallow. She tried to step back, but the crowd had closed in around her. Eyes blazed with anger. Fingers pointed. Whispers grew sharp like knives. Henry lifted Grace in his arms again and turned to the elders. I am her father. I stood quiet too long for the sake of peace. But tonight I will choose justice over silence. Tell me, elders, what must be done? The torches flickered. Mr. Paul stroked his gray beard. We will judge according to truth. But first, Grace must speak. Let her voice be heard. All eyes shifted to the girl, wrapped in her father's arms, her bandaged shoulder glowing white in the torchlight. She looked so small, so fragile, but her eyes were clear, steady. Henry lowered her gently onto the stool. Grace swallowed, then spoke, her voice trembling but strong. She hurt me. She burned me. And before that she called me names every day. She told me I was nothing. She told me no one loved me. But, Grace's lips quivered and tears welled up in her eyes. I still prayed for her. I wanted her to be happy here. A murmur of sorrow swept through the crowd. Some women covered their mouths, tears in their eyes. Even the sternest of men shook their heads, their faces dark with anger. Linda dropped to her knees, clutching her dress. Please, forgive me. It was a mistake. I didn't mean. Henry turned slowly. His voice was low but sharp as steel. Grace may forgive. But forgiveness does not erase consequences. The crowd grew louder. Some shouted, banish her. Others called, take her to the magistrate. Linda shook her head wildly, her hands trembling. No, please. Henry, don't let them send me away. Henry stared at her, then at the elders. His silence carried more weight than any shout. Finally, Mr. Paul raised his hand again. The crowd fell still. Tomorrow morning the council will decide. Tonight the accused will stay under watch. She will not leave this town until judgment is passed. He pointed at two strong young men. Watch her. Let her not escape. Linda's eyes widened. She tried to rise, but the men stepped forward and gripped her arms firmly. She struggled, then slumped, her sobs shaking her body. Henry lifted Grace again, cradling her as if she were made of glass. He walked away from the square, the torches lighting his path. Behind him, the bell hung silent, but the memory of its cry still rang in everyone's chest. As he carried his daughter home, Henry's heart was heavy with questions. What punishment was enough for betrayal this deep? Would his daughter's scars heal? Could their house ever be a place of peace again? He kissed Grace's forehead and whispered, I will not fail you again. But he didn't know that Linda had one last trick hidden in her heart. One desperate move that would shock them all before dawn. Where are you watching from right now? Tell me in the comments. And if this story has your heart racing, make sure to like, subscribe and share with a friend, because the most shocking twist is still to come. The night was heavy. Crickets sang in the bush, and the wind rattled the dry leaves against the walls. Henry laid Grace on her bed gently, adjusting the pillow so her bandaged shoulder rested with less pain. She smiled faintly, whispering, Thank you, Daddy. Her eyes closed, but her grip on his hand lingered, unwilling to let go. He kissed her forehead softly. I'm here, Grace. I won't leave your side, he whispered. Outside, the town was not asleep. Neighbors gathered in clusters, their voices hushed but angry. Everyone had seen the burns, everyone had heard the elders. Mothers clutched their children tighter, whispering warnings. This is what envy does. Never let it grow in your heart. But Linda, locked in the back room of the elders' hall with 2 guards keeping watch outside, was not quiet. She paced like a trapped animal. Her eyes darted, her chest rose and fell quickly. She thought of the inheritance, $50,000, waiting like a golden key that would never belong to her. She thought of Grace, the girl who had everything, beauty, kindness, love, and now wealth. Hatred boiled in her chest. I will not let them destroy me, she hissed under her breath. I will not let that little girl win. Hours crept by. The guards sat by the doorway, their eyelids heavy. One leaned against the wall, the other rubbed his eyes, yawning. Linda saw her chance. Quietly, she slipped the thin bangle from her wrist, bent it against the edge of the wooden bench, and twisted it into a sharp edge. She moved slowly, carefully, scraping the rope around her wrists until it loosened. She didn't breathe until the rope slipped free. She crept to the window, pushed it open, and slid into the darkness. The guards stirred at the sound, but by the time they rushed in, the window frame was swaying and Linda's shadow had vanished into the night. Back at Henry's house, Grace stirred in her sleep, restless. Henry sat in the chair beside her bed, dozing lightly, his head nodding forward. The lamp burned low. Outside, the night whispered. Then, tap, tap, tap. The sound came from the back door. Henry's eyes snapped open. He held his breath, listening. The tapping came again, faster this time. He rose, moving quietly through the hallway, and opened the kitchen door, only to find nothing but the night wind and the branches scratching against the wall. He shook his head, locked the door, and returned to Grace's room. But he didn't know. Linda was watching from the shadows of the mango tree. Her eyes glinted with something sharp. She had a small bottle clutched in her hand, poison she had stolen long ago from the market herbalist. If I cannot have peace, no one will, she whispered to herself. The hours dragged until dawn began to push pale light over the rooftops. The cock crowed. The town stirred. Grace awoke with a wince, her voice soft. Daddy, will I still go to school? Henry brushed her curls from her face. Yes, my child. Nothing will stop you. His heart ached, but he forced a smile. You will go, and you will shine brighter than anyone. Grace smiled weakly, but her eyes carried hope. She closed them again, whispering, I'll try, Daddy. I promise. Just then, loud shouts rose from the square. Henry's head snapped up. He stepped to the window and saw people rushing, pointing toward the elders' hall. His stomach clenched. Something was wrong. He kissed Grace's forehead quickly. Stay here, sweetheart. I'll be back. Then he hurried into the street. The crowd had already gathered. She escaped, someone shouted. The stepmother is gone. Others shook their heads angrily. Witchcraft in her heart. She will not rest until she destroys the girl. Henry's face went cold. His fists tightened. He turned toward the path that led out of town, but then, a woman screamed. Everyone turned. There she was. Linda. She was not running. She was walking boldly back into the square, her dress torn, her hair wild, her eyes burning. In her hand was the small bottle, the cork already pulled free. People gasped, children hid behind their mothers. Mr. Paul rose to his feet, his staff trembling in his hand. Linda, he thundered. What madness is this? Linda raised the bottle high. If I cannot have this house, this man, or this life, then I will take what matters most to him. Her voice cracked like fire. Tonight it ends. The crowd screamed in panic as she turned and bolted straight toward Henry's house, where Grace lay, innocent, waiting. Henry's heart stopped. He broke into a run, his legs burning, his chest exploding. No, he shouted, his voice tearing through the morning air. Not my daughter. The crowd surged behind him, shouting, crying out, chasing. Dust flew. Torches dropped. The earth itself seemed to shake with the rush of feet. Henry's eyes locked on the door of his house as Linda's figure disappeared inside. His blood roared in his ears. He ran harder, faster, every muscle straining. And then, Grace's scream split the air. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. And if this story has your heart in your throat, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because what Henry does next will leave everyone in shock. Henry's chest felt like it would explode as Grace's scream echoed through the house. He pushed past the crowd piling into his yard and slammed the front door open so hard it cracked against the wall. Inside, chaos waited. The lamp had been knocked over, smoke curled from the rug, and Linda stood over Grace's bed, the small poison bottle uncorked and tilting toward the girl's lips. "Stop!" Henry roared, his voice shaking the walls. Linda froze for half a second, but her eyes were wild, her hand trembling. "She stole everything from me," she screamed. "Your love, your house, even your future. If I can't have peace, neither will she." Henry launched himself across the room, faster than he had moved in years. He slammed into Linda's arm, knocking the bottle from her hand. The poison splashed across the floor, sizzling where it touched the wood. Grace coughed and clutched her bandaged arm, eyes wide with terror. Henry shoved Linda back. "You dare touch my daughter again?" His voice was low, deadly calm, the kind of tone that made everyone outside fall silent. Linda stumbled against the wall, panting, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. She grabbed a piece of broken lamp glass from the floor and held it up. "If I can't have her life, I'll take my own." The crowd outside gasped as they peered through the doorway. Mothers shielded their children's eyes. Mr. Paul's booming voice carried into the room. "Linda, put it down. Do not add blood to your crimes." But Linda's eyes flicked between Henry and Grace, and her grip on the shard tightened. "You will regret ever crossing me," she spat. Henry stepped in front of Grace, shielding her. "If you want to destroy something," he said slowly, "then destroy me. But you will not touch her again." The room was so quiet, the only sound was Grace's ragged breathing. Then Linda screamed and rushed forward with the glass raised. The crowd outside surged, people shouting, some trying to push inside. But Henry didn't flinch. He caught Linda's wrist midair, twisted hard, and the glass clattered to the ground. He shoved her backward with a strength fueled by fury. She stumbled, fell against the wall and slumped, breathing heavily. Two of the young men from the square rushed in, grabbing her arms before she could recover. She shrieked, kicked, cursed, but their grip was iron. They dragged her outside into the sunlight, where the crowd closed in. Henry turned back to Grace, who was crying softly, her face pale but her spirit still shining. He gathered her into his arms. "You're safe," he whispered, holding her tight. "She will never touch you again." Outside, the town square filled again within minutes. The elders sat grim-faced as Linda was thrown to the ground before them. Her hair was wild, her dress torn, and her eyes darted from one face to another, realizing there was no more escape. Mr. Paul rose slowly, his staff in hand. "This is beyond anger. This is wickedness. You tried once to burn her. Tonight you tried to poison her. And when stopped, you tried to stab. Do you deny it before all these witnesses?" The people shouted together, "We saw it. We saw it." Linda opened her mouth, but no words came. Her shoulders slumped and she lowered her head. Henry stepped forward, Grace still in his arms. His voice was heavy but clear. "Elders, she cannot remain in my house. She cannot remain in this town. Her heart is a danger to every child, every home. If you allow her to stay, no one will sleep in peace." The elders nodded gravely. Mr. Paul raised his staff high. "By the authority of the council, Linda is banished from this town. She will leave by sunrise and never return. If she steps foot here again, she will answer not just to us but to the law." The crowd erupted, some in relief, others in anger, some in sorrow that envy had led a woman so far astray. Linda screamed, trying to lunge at Henry, but the guards dragged her back. Her cries faded into the distance as they pulled her toward the edge of town, her voice breaking against the night. Henry looked at Grace, her head resting against his chest. He kissed her temple softly. "It's over, my child. She cannot hurt you again." But even as he spoke those words, a part of him knew this was not the end. For envy does not always die quietly, it lingers, waiting for another chance to strike. And just as the crowd began to disperse, a traveler entered the square, carrying a message that would throw the town into new confusion, one that even Henry had not prepared for. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. And if this story has you holding your breath, remember to like, subscribe, and share, because what's written in that message will shock everyone. The traveler stepped into the square just as the crowd began to scatter. His boots were covered in red dust from the road, and a leather satchel hung across his chest. He looked tired, his beard rough, his eyes sharp as if they had seen too much. Everyone turned to him, curious. Travelers did not often arrive in the middle of the night. "I bring a message," he said, his voice carrying. "For Henry and for the elders." Henry, holding Grace tightly, looked up. "Who sent you?" The traveler unbuckled his satchel and pulled out a sealed envelope stamped with a red crest. He held it high so the torchlight caught the mark. "It comes from the city magistrate." A hush fell over the crowd. Mr. Paul stepped forward and took the envelope with careful hands. He studied the crest, then broke the seal and unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the words slowly, his brows furrowing deeper with each line. Finally he looked up. "This letter," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "confirms that Linda is not who she claimed to be." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mr. Paul read aloud, "The woman known as Linda is wanted in 2 neighboring towns for crimes of fraud and deceit. She posed as a fabric trader, stealing from merchants and fled before justice could catch her. She carries false names and false smiles. Any town that harbors her will suffer her schemes." The people erupted in shouts. "Ah! We knew she was no good. A snake in the house." Henry's stomach sank. He thought back to the day she had arrived, her bright laughter, her smooth words, the way she had fit herself into his home. How could he have been so blind? He clutched Grace closer, his heart pounding with anger and shame. Linda, held by the guards at the edge of the square, thrashed wildly. "Lies?" she screamed. "All lies. Don't listen to them. Henry, you know me. You know I love you." But Henry's eyes were stone. "Love does not burn. Love does not poison. Love does not steal," he said coldly. "Whatever you were, you are no wife of mine." Mr. Paul lowered the letter and looked at the people. "There is no more doubt. By sunrise she leaves this land. And if she returns, she will be handed to the magistrate." The crowd roared in agreement. Mothers clapped their hands in relief, men shouted blessings over Grace, and children stared with wide eyes, whispering the tale they would tell for years to come. Linda sagged in the guard's grip, her face drained of all color. For the first time she looked small, powerless. She spat weakly on the ground, but no one paid her any mind. Henry carried Grace back to their home, his heart heavy but steady. He laid her in bed again, brushing her curls back from her forehead. She looked up at him with tired eyes. "Daddy, will she ever come back?" Henry kissed her cheek. "No, my child. Not if I have breath in me. And even if she tries, the whole town will rise against her. You are safe." Grace closed her eyes, a small smile touching her lips despite her pain. "Thank you." Henry sat beside her, the weight of the night pressing on him. He had nearly lost his daughter, and the woman he had trusted had nearly destroyed them both. But even in the heaviness, there was a flicker of hope. Grace had survived. The truth had been revealed. The town had stood by them. He whispered a prayer under his breath. "May envy never return to this house. May kindness live here again." But outside, in the darkness beyond the torches, Linda's voice carried faintly on the wind as she was dragged away. "This is not the end, Henry. You will see me again." The words sent a chill through him. He tightened his grip on Grace's hand and stared into the night, knowing the storm was not yet over. Where are you watching from right now? Share it in the comments. And if this story has you on edge, don't forget to like, subscribe and send it to a friend, because Linda's next move will shock you even more. The sun rose slowly, spreading orange and gold across the sky, but the warmth did not reach Henry's heart. He had not slept. He sat by Grace's bedside all night, watching her breathe, listening for any sound outside the house. Her bandaged arm still pained her, but she whispered softly whenever she stirred, "I'm okay, Daddy." When the rooster crowed, the town gathered again in the square. Linda was dragged forward, her wrists tied, her eyes swollen from tears and rage. The elders stood tall, their staffs striking the ground. Mr. Paul spoke, his voice steady. "We banish this woman. She will not walk among us again. May this be a warning to every heart. Envy is a fire that burns not only others, but the one who carries it." The guards marched Linda down the road that led out of town. The people followed, watching. Some spat. Some shook their heads. Some whispered prayers that she would never return. But Linda, though beaten and humiliated, did not bow her head. She glared back, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You've only begun to lose." Henry held Grace close, refusing to flinch. The crowd shouted louder, drowning Linda's words until she vanished beyond the hills. By midday, life in the town began to breathe again. Neighbors brought food to Henry's house. Bowls of soup, bread, roasted yam. Women came to help clean. Children left flowers at Grace's window. The house that had been filled with fear now filled with love. Grace smiled faintly as she saw the kindness of her people. "Daddy," she whispered, "maybe pain can bring people closer." Henry kissed her forehead. "Yes, my child. Pain can either break us or it can bind us stronger. Today I choose stronger." For a while, peace returned. Henry worked in the fields, neighbors visited, and Grace slowly healed. Her laughter began to return like sunshine after rain. She would sit by the window with her books, reading aloud to the children who gathered outside. The scars on her arm were still raw, but her spirit shone brighter than before. But peace never stays long when bitterness still lives. One evening, as the sky turned purple and the crickets began to sing, a traveler passed through town and stopped at Henry's gate. He carried news that froze the air. "I saw her," he said. "That woman you banished, Linda. She was in the next village. She swore she would come back for what she calls hers. She's gathering people who do not know her crimes. She tells them she was treated unfairly. She says she will return with fire." The word spread through the town like sparks. Mothers clutched their children, men sharpened machetes, the elders shook their heads gravely. Mr. Paul spoke once more. "If she dares return, she will meet not one man, but the strength of us all." Henry felt the weight in his chest grow heavy again. He looked at Grace, who sat quietly with her book. She closed it, looked up at him and said softly, "Daddy, she won't stop, will she?" Henry shook his head. "No, my child. But neither will we." That night, Henry stayed awake again, staring out the window, his machete resting by the wall. He thought of his late wife, of the promise he had made to protect Grace, of the $50,000 waiting for her future. He clenched his jaw. "If Linda returns," he whispered into the dark, "she will find not fear but fire." And even as he spoke, beyond the hills, Linda sat by another fire, whispering her own plans to the strangers who believed her lies. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. And if you're holding your breath, don't forget to like, subscribe and share, because when Linda returns, the entire town will face a storm like never before. The days passed, but the town never truly relaxed. Every creak of a branch in the night, every shadow on the path, made people glance over their shoulders. Mothers no longer let their children fetch water alone. Men kept spears and machetes by their doors. Even the church bell seemed to ring more urgently on Sundays, as though warning of something near. Henry tried to give Grace a sense of normalcy. He read to her by lamplight, walked her slowly around the compound so her strength would return, and told her stories of her late mother's gentleness. Grace smiled through her pain, but fear still haunted her dreams. Sometimes she would wake suddenly crying, "She's here. She's here." Henry would hold her close, whispering, "Not while I breathe, my child." But whispers traveled faster than the wind. One evening, a farmer returned from the neighboring fields with his face pale. "I saw her," he told the elders. "Linda. She is not alone. She walks with 3 strange men. Their faces are hard, their eyes like fire. She is planning something." The news struck like thunder. The town gathered once more in the square. Torches flared. Mr. Paul raised his staff. "We will not wait for darkness to fall on us," he said firmly. "If she comes, we will meet her with the strength of unity. Our fathers built this town on justice, not fear. Let no man or woman cower." The people nodded, murmuring their agreement. Some carried stones. Others sharpened hoes. Even the young boys filled buckets with water, ready to quench flames if Linda tried to set the village ablaze. That night the sky was thick with clouds. No moonlight. The air felt heavy as though holding its breath. Henry sat awake by the window again, Grace sleeping lightly on her bed. His hand rested on the machete at his side. His ears strained for every sound. Then he heard it. A rustle. A footstep. Then another. Henry rose quietly, moving to the door. His heart thudded like a drum. He pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning. Outside, shadows shifted beneath the mango tree. Then from the darkness, a voice slithered through the air. "Henry?" "Linda." She stepped forward, her eyes gleaming even in the dark. Beside her, 3 men stood tall, their hands gripping sticks and ropes. One carried a burning torch. "You thought you could throw me away," Linda hissed, her voice sharp as broken glass. "But I told you, this is not the end. That girl will not inherit what should be mine. Tonight, I finish what I started." Henry's grip tightened on the machete. "Not while I stand," he said, his voice steady. Linda sneered. "Then you will fall." The men raised their weapons. The torch flared brighter. Grace stirred inside the house, sensing the danger, and cried out, "Daddy!" The crowd, already half awake from watchfulness, began to gather. Feet pounded on the dusty road. Torches lit up one by one. Neighbors rushed to Henry's yard, shouting warnings, calling for the elders. Linda's eyes widened as she saw the people closing in, but her pride would not let her step back. She raised her voice, screaming, "If I cannot have her life, then this whole town will burn." She lunged toward the house, the torch blazing in her hand. Henry stepped forward, machete gleaming in the torchlight. The crowd gasped, children cried out, and Grace screamed again from inside. And in that fiery moment, Henry made a move that would change the story forever. Where are you watching from right now? Tell me in the comments. And if this story has your heart racing, make sure you subscribe, like, and share with a friend, because what Henry does next will leave the whole town in shock. The torch crackled in Linda's hand as she charged toward the doorway, fire dancing dangerously close to the thatched roof. Grace screamed from inside, her voice trembling with fear. Henry moved with the speed of a man whose entire soul lived for one purpose: to protect his child. With one swift strike, Henry swung his machete. The flat side smacked the torch clean from Linda's hand, sending it spinning into the dirt. Sparks hissed and died. The crowd roared, rushing closer, their own torches lighting the yard like daylight. Linda shrieked, lunging again, but Henry shoved her back with his free arm. The three strange men rushed forward, shouting, raising their sticks and ropes. One swung at Henry, but a neighbor leapt in from the side, blocking the blow with a hoe handle. Another villager hurled a stone, striking one man squarely on the shoulder. The crowd surged like a river breaking its banks. "This is our town," voices thundered. "You will not destroy it." The three men fought wildly, but they were no match for dozens of hands defending their homes. One by one, the villagers overpowered them, binding their wrists with rope. The torchbearer was forced to his knees, the flames stomped out under heavy boots. In the center of it all, Henry pinned Linda to the ground, the machete's edge pressing close enough to freeze her movement but not cut. His face was set like stone. "I warned you," he growled. "This house is not your battlefield. My daughter is not your victim. Tonight, you face the justice of the people." Linda writhed, her voice shrill. "I am your wife. You cannot do this to me." Henry's eyes burned. "A wife protects. A wife nurtures. You tried to burn, poison, and kill. Whatever you are no wife of mine." The crowd roared its agreement. Mr. Paul and the elders pushed through the people, their staffs thumping on the ground for silence. Mr. Paul's voice cut through the night. "Enough. We have seen with our own eyes. There is no more to argue. Bind her. Tomorrow she will not just leave this town, she will be delivered to the magistrate with these men." The guards moved swiftly, tying Linda's wrists tightly, ignoring her cries. She spat and cursed, her eyes flashing with hatred. But for the first time, the fear beneath her fury showed clearly. She knew this was different. Banishment was one thing. Facing the city magistrate was another. Grace, trembling, peeked from the doorway, her bandaged arm glowing pale in the firelight. When she saw her father standing tall, machete in hand, the crowd behind him like an unshakable wall, she whispered, "Daddy saved me." Henry turned, his eyes softening as he looked at her. He sheathed the machete and lifted her into his arms, holding her close. "Not just me, Grace," he said, his voice carrying to the crowd. "Our people saved us. Evil only wins when good people stay silent. Tonight you all spoke with courage." The crowd cheered, some raising their torches high. Women wept and hugged their children. Men clapped Henry on the back. The unity in that yard glowed brighter than any flame Linda had tried to bring. But Linda, dragged to the center of the square and thrown at the elders' feet, still found breath to hiss her final threat. "Even if you hand me over, even if I rot in a cell, the scars on that girl's body will never fade. She will remember me every day." The square fell silent at her venomous words. Henry's face hardened. He lifted Grace higher, his voice steady and strong. "Yes, she will remember. But she will remember not your cruelty, she will remember that she was stronger than it. That she survived. That kindness still triumphed. That love still stood taller than hate." The people shouted in agreement, their voices drowning out Linda's. But as dawn's light crept across the horizon and the elders prepared to march Linda and her men to the magistrate, a deeper question lingered in Henry's heart. Would peace truly return, or had Linda planted a wound that would take years to heal? Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. And if this story has you holding your breath, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because the final chapter will reveal how Henry and Grace rise from the ashes of betrayal. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the village, painting the clay walls in soft gold. The people gathered once more in the square, their faces tired but determined. Linda and her three accomplices were bound tightly, guarded on every side. The elders stood tall, their staffs planted firmly into the earth. Henry carried Grace in his arms, her bandaged shoulder resting against his chest. She was weak but awake, her eyes filled with quiet courage. The villagers made way for them, bowing their heads slightly as father and daughter passed. Mr. Paul raised his hand and the crowd hushed. This night has shown us what envy can do. It begins as a whisper, but if left to grow, it becomes a fire that tries to consume everything good. Linda brought fire to this house, but today we answer with truth and unity. The people murmured in agreement. Mothers nodded, clutching their children closer. Men crossed their arms, standing like shields around their families. Henry stepped forward, his voice strong though heavy with pain. I kept quiet for too long, thinking peace could grow in silence. But silence gave evil a place to hide. Last night, I learned that a father must not only love his child, he must also fight for her, even if it costs him everything. He turned toward Linda, who sat bound and trembling, her once bright eyes dark with fury. You thought you could break us. But you only made us stronger. Grace lifted her head, her small voice carrying through the square. She hurt me. But I am not broken. I will live. I will still go to school. I will still become something good. The crowd gasped softly at the girl's bravery, then broke into cheers. Women wiped tears from their eyes. Men pounded their staffs and tools against the ground in support. Even Mr. Paul's stern face softened. This child, he said, has more strength in her than envy can ever destroy. At his signal, the guards tightened their grip on Linda and her men. At sunrise, Mr. Paul declared, they will be marched to the city magistrate. Let them answer not just to us but to the law of the land. May they never harm another innocent soul again. The crowd erupted with relief. Some clapped, others sang softly, their voices rising like a prayer. Children danced in the dust, their laughter chasing away the fear that had weighed heavy for too long. Henry turned to Grace, his eyes shining with pride. You are my joy, my light. The world tried to snuff you out, but you still shine. From today on you will live without fear. I promise you that. Grace smiled faintly, resting her head against him. I believe you, Daddy. As the sun climbed higher, the guards led Linda and her men away down the long road to the city. She struggled, shouted, cursed, but her voice grew smaller and smaller until it was nothing but an echo behind the hills. The town watched until she was gone. Then slowly life returned. The market reopened. The school bell rang. Women spread their washing on the line and men returned to the fields. Yet in every corner of the village, people whispered the story of Grace, the girl who had survived envy's fire. Weeks later, when her wounds had healed enough for her to travel, Henry walked her proudly to the city, where she began her studies with the scholarship she had earned. She carried her books in one hand, her father's strong hand in the other, and though her scars remained, they were no longer marks of pain, they were marks of survival. The town never forgot. Mothers told their children at night, do not let jealousy live in your heart. Remember Linda. Remember Grace. Choose kindness instead. And Grace? She grew stronger each day, her heart shining brighter, her laughter returning like music. She proved that kindness, no matter how wounded, always rises above cruelty. The story of that night would be told for generations, not as a tale of fire and poison, but as a story of courage, justice, and a father's love that refused to bend. Where are you watching from right now? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with a friend, because stories like this remind us that love always wins over envy.